In the spirit of Halloween, paranormal or not, what is the scariest, creepiest or most unsettling experience of your life? Not me, but someone who lived in my town. Let's just call him Bob. So Bob was working on a fishing boat. I think it was one of those that uses large nets to catch the fish. Anyways, they were in town with the boat, and then he observed that something was happening over at the boat. Apparently someone had fallen over. So Bob started running towards the boat, and one man was walking away from the boat. Bob didn't think about it at that moment and just kept going towards the boat. When they finally pulled up the man who had fallen over, Bob recognized him as the man who had walked away from the boat. I guess probably not that weird, but it freaked me out anyway. One night in college I was trying to go to sleep, but I wasn't really tired, so I was just staring out my window and laying on my bed. Out of nowhere a white mass floated past the top 1/4 of my window in about a second. Looked like it was the size of a basketball, but I'm not sure how far away from my window it was. The weird thing is I was living on the 5th floor of my complex, so I feel like a plastic bag or anything like that couldn't have floated that high up. It's probably nothing, but I still get goosebumps thinking about that. Something really triggered my fight or flight reflexes about that thing. I can't explain why. I was stationed in Germany until just a few months ago. Like a lot of old places, it has its share of history. Some of it isn't as dead as you believe. I rent a farmhouse in the country, about 10 miles from base. It's old, built in 1768, remodeled since then, but it has a weight to it. All those years, settled into the stones. I love it. Fast forward a month or two and my girlfriend is staying there while I work a night shift. I get a call from her asking if I've ever heard footsteps in the house. Nope. Now she's freaking out. I tell her to stay put, inform her where I keep my burglary adjustment tool, baseball bat, and tell my expeditor I need to run home. I get home, nothing. Kiss her, tell her I love her, and check all the doors and windows. All secure. Fast forward to it just being me, being fat and watching Netflix as I stuff my gob and lament my life choices that have led me here. Footsteps in the hall outside my room. Cats alert. Holy fuck, it's happening.jpg. Nothing out there. Scared shitless. Doors slam. No closed doors upon investigation. Loudly whisper, I'm just passing through, man, you do you and I'll do me. If anyone breaks in, you're welcome to do that House on Haunted Hill thing where you drag them into the wall and eat them. Spend the next 2 years broing out with a Nazi spectre. I loved that house. My little girl's Paper Jam's guitar playing itself at Christmas when it was off. It was her dad's last Christmas present to her before he died. He loved playing guitar. It played Hit Me With Your Best Shot after my new boyfriend gave her a spanking for throwing a tantrum at bedtime. He never did that again. O_O. When I was a kid and lived in England, I remember one night trying to sleep but being unable to. I shouted as kids do that I couldn't sleep to the sounds of my mother's "You're not trying hard enough." Well, a few minutes later I heard the door slightly opened and shouted my mum. She was still downstairs telling me to sleep. I hid under my blankets as any normal human being would, before peering out of the corner. In walked a man. He was a not blue color and stood right in front of me looking out of my window. I shouted my mum multiple times to no answer and just continued to hide, occasionally looking at him. Eventually he either walked away or vanished because he was gone. Looking back, I assumed I'd fallen asleep since my mum never answered, but when I mentioned it to her she said that she remembered and had just stopped answering me in hopes I'd give up trying to stay awake longer. My parents were traveling to the Bahamas and I was staying with my grandparents. I was probably 10 at the time. I was feeling lonely and homesick and was crying a bit, probably around midnight. My parents were in a different part of the house. The air felt really heavy and absolutely dead quiet and dead still except for my sniffling. Out of nowhere, I heard a voice about 2 inches in front of my face say "oh, boo-hoo" in a flippant and sarcastic way. I don't think I moved for a solid few minutes, freaking out and listening. I woke my parents up and told them. They were a little bit unnerved. In the same house, my mom, when she was in her teens, came home from a party and was the only person in the house. She was walking down a hall to her room and she saw a man dressed in prison garb walk from her brother's bedroom to her parents'. He stopped, looked at her, then walked through the door. She called her cousins to search the house, but they never found any sign of anything unusual. There was a prison that was shut down a couple miles down the road and decades before. She always speculated it was someone who had maybe died while fleeing and was reenacting an escape before the house was built there. I had just moved into my first apartment with a roommate, but the first week he was on vacation, so I was home alone. He was kind of a pothead and had mentioned feel free to have some if I wanted, including his THC pills. So being a fan of horror films, I took a pill and turned on the remake of Evil Dead. It was about 1 AM at this point and I began to hear screams and sad mournings. I would then pause the movie thinking maybe it was from that. I'd hear nothing. So I'd press play again only to hear it again, but something new sounded weird. Why was it coming from my front door and the movie have nothing to do visually for that sound? So I paused it and ran to my front door, trying to peek through the eye hole and listen through the crack of the door. But I heard nothing. Just silence. I slowly walk back to my couch and at this point I'm thinking, oh shit, is this all in my head from the THC pill? I turned on the movie again and boom, again the sound of crying or just overall sadness was coming from the hallway. I decide at this point it's in my head and turn up the TV much louder. Again I keep hearing it. This time I hear a bang like someone punching the wall outside. I paused the movie and ran to the front door. This time I keep hearing it, loud and clear. It sounded like a male crying. All I could think of is someone got beat up, stabbed, shot. I wanted to open the door and see, but moving to a big city from a small one and really high, I got super paranoid and well, scared, so I just did what I did and tried to make out what I was hearing or see something through the peephole. Still nothing, and about 10 minutes later I decide to turn on the movie and this time just crank it. I also did not have a cell phone at this time, otherwise I would have called the front desk. The next morning I went out thinking, oh god, if there is blood anywhere I'm going to feel so bad for not trying to help. Anyways, I had told my roommate about this and he definitely had a laugh. Then one day we got a knock on the door and there was this kid making the same sounds trying to get into our apartment once we opened the door. It turns out all those sounds was this kid who was mentally challenged and had locked himself out of his parents' apartment. I feel terrible as I normally would have helped. But I'm glad it wasn't someone dying out in the hallway. A few years ago my school had a go with your parent to work day. I've chosen my dad, who at the time owned and worked in a car workshop. It was late fall, so it got dark pretty early in the day. When we drove home, it already was dark. And for around 10 minutes the road leads through a dark and dense forest. When we entered the forest I saw a deer in between the trees, running along at the speed of our car. When I told my dad to look, he briefly looked in the direction and said he saw nothing, but on the other hand, he had to drive. So, I looked at the deer for a few minutes and suddenly it kind of fell, like it stumbled or something. I didn't think much of it and just looked at the street again. So, there was a curve ahead where you had to brake because it was very tight and a lot of accidents happened there. We finished that curve and, what is there on the side of the road? A dead deer, with a blood trail to the middle of the road. So, it seems like someone had an accident with a deer and moved it out of the way. And in that moment I realized that weird deer I saw stumbling a few minutes ago. And to this day I get goosebumps when I recall the event. When I was 11, my family and I were staying at a motel in Cape Cod. We were laying in bed watching TV, and my brother and I were sort of jesting back and forth. Anyways, right as I was talking, this tall black figure that looked like this amorphous cloud came out of the bathroom and passed in front of the TV, then phased out of the door that led out to the parking lot. I pretty much screamed and threw the covers over my head, and my brother just WTF, lolled at me. Apparently I was the